Hi friends, my name is Baron, and this is my channel where I talk about book stuff. I'm the Book Baron. Welcome in. So today we're talking about some memorable books, so memorable that they deserve a reread. So what inspired this was I'm fighting off a reading slump right now, really bad. And part of that means I was thinking a lot about doing some rereading. Before I knew what reading slumps were, I used to do this with two different sets of books, my Twilight series and my Vampire Diaries series. I would revisit those to kind of just revisit the feelings, the energy, but also to get back on track with reading. I will say I'm going to leave off the Losers Duet and The Dare by Harley LaRue because I feel like I talk about it in every rec video. I find a way to sneak it in every time, but know that that's on there. And then I am going to split these into two different categories. The first is books that are so good. They're so memorable. I want to re-experience the magic. The other are a few that I question my experience with them, but those will be more towards the end. So without further ado, let's get into things, shall we? So I think I have roughly 10 or 11 books to talk to you about, and these are not in any particular order. I just sort of like, as I thought about them, I put them down on the list. And there may be some that I even have missed, to be honest, because I wasn't very thorough with this, but 10 just seems like a lot, to be honest. So the first book that is in the so good I need to re-experience magic, Vicious by L.J. Shen. This is on KU. It's part of an interconnected series. I think there's like 4 books in one novella. It's an enemies to lovers, sort of an unhinged high school bully romance / second chance. I assume a billionaire hero. He's got a lot of money. This is about Baron. I share a name with the villain, so maybe that's why I like him so much. I digress. But his nickname is Vicious, hence the title. He's this wealthy, brooding, never been told no rich kid. And he lives next to Amelia LeBlanc because her family works for Vicious's family. One day she is in the house and he believes that she has witnessed or overheard something that he wanted to keep a secret, and this sets him off on the wrong foot. So he begins bullying her to try and keep her in her place because she's this new kid and completely immune to his charms and just isn't involved in this town the way everyone else is. She's just this like artsy, a little bit more free-spirited. So years down the line, they end up reconnecting when she is living in New York City, and he sort of makes an offer that she can't refuse because she's in a bit of a bind, but he has his own plans. We've got a little bit of revenge going on. So this is actually the book that sort of inspired this video because there is something about Vicious's character that is just this perfect balance, right? Because he's this unhinged, dark hero that bends just enough to Amelia to really love her, but not enough that he really loses his personality. And he just constantly is walking this fine line in my head of redeemable and unredeemable character. It was one of the first times that I read like a darker romance, and I think about this book very frequently, and I will be doing a reread of this month, so we'll see if it holds up. Next up, I have 2 books that are by the same author, and I only have a copy of one of them, but I'm going to kind of talk about them in tandem because they're somewhat similar, but that is A Deal with the Devil and A Devil in the Deep Blue Sea. Both are by Elizabeth O'Rourke. I've already reread these before. These are part of a series of 4 books that are interconnected standalones. They are on KU, but fun fact, the audiobooks are also available on Elizabeth O'Rourke's YouTube channel, so you can consume them that way. Both of these are enemies to lovers and have rich heroes. In A Deal with the Devil, this is more of like office place enemies to lovers romance. The premise of this is that Tally needs to step in for her friend who's going on leave while they're going overseas to adopt a child. They need someone to replace them as an assistant for this sort of temperamental, arrogant plastic surgeon to the stars. That is Hayes. And Hayes, he loves his whiskey and he loves women. The second he finds out she is his assistant, he wants to push her buttons and see how far he can take things. Asks her to do some very questionable things. With A Devil in the Deep Blue Sea, we've got a little bit different dynamic. So this is ex-boyfriend's brother. And this is about Drew, who is a famous singer, and she has agreed to give it one last go with her ex, Six. So she ends up going on a tropical vacation with his family in order to try and mend their relationship. But the problem is his brother Josh, who has never liked her, is also going to be on this vacation, and he is determined to throw a wrench in things. So I actually constantly reread these two books in particular. There is something so perfect about the balance between a melancholy woman and rom-commy banter and slow burn, but in 300 pages, that Elizabeth O'Rourke just like nails the balance in these two books in particular. The other two in the series, they're good, but these two are my favorites. They make me laugh out loud, even though I've read them, I think 3 times now. It's something as a little treat to myself, usually around my birthday, that I like to reread them. Next up, we have one that I've been talking about a little bit more recently, so I'll try and be a little bit brief just for the folks who consistently watch my videos. Hi, I love you all. I'm so sorry that I'm talking about this again in like the 4th video in a row. And that is A Discovery of Witches by Deborah Harkness. It's the first in a series of 3. This is enemies to lovers, more of a paranormal, sort of urban fantasy, I guess, romance, but it's like more of the in the real world, but like vampires and witches exist. This is about Diana, who is a historian, and she works at Oxford. So she spends a lot of time in the library there, and she is also a witch. She is not super jazzed about being a witch though, so she doesn't tend to use her powers very often. However, one day when she's doing some research in the library, she ends up calling this very rare manuscript that was thought to be lost to time. And this sends all the paranormal creatures into a frenzy. They want to get their hands on this mysterious manuscript. They all have different theories about what it says in there. And she ends up having to team up with the last person on Earth that she wants to. And that is a vampire geneticist named Matthew, who also works at this college. Together, they end up unraveling the secrets of the manuscript and also what happened to her parents, who were mysteriously killed years and years ago. The reason that I want to reread this is this was one of those magical books that I had not been reading for a very long time. I had been a student for years, and the idea of reading really hadn't appealed to me. And I remember going on a trip and seeing this just stunning French woman sipping a glass of wine and reading this book on the plane. And I was like, I would like to be like that lady very much. And so I picked this book up and I read all 3 books. These are thick boys. I read all 3 books in the span of a week. I ate them up. And there's just an atmosphere, especially to this first book. The second and third book, not as much, but the atmosphere in this book in particular is just something really special. I want to be a part of this world again and get reinvested. In fact, I've pointed it out in other videos, but I have the companion guide back there on my shelf, and it is thicker than this book. If we were talking about Roman Empire books, this is one of those for me. One other thing before I put this down. Sorry, I know I said I was going to be brief and then I'm absolutely not doing that. The other thing that I really love about this is the author is a historian, so much of this book, although it's fantastical and magical and we've got witches and I was going to say wizards, witches and vampires and demons, it's very grounded in a way that feels real and realistic because there are so many elements that are tied into historical imagery. That's A Discovery of Witches. Next up is actually one that I think about rereading somewhat frequently. It's usually about once a month. This kind of pops into my head, but I'm waiting for the audiobook to come out because this is going to be traditionally published, and that is The Wall of Winnipeg by Mariana Zapata. And this is sort of a workplace romance, sports romance that involves a fake marriage. This follows Vanessa, who is working for a star NFL player, Aiden, and he kind of takes her for granted, doesn't treat her very nicely, and she decides, you know what, screw it, I'm done. I deserve better. I'm gonna go start other adventures somewhere else and start the graphic design business I've always wanted to. Aiden turns back up at her door, begging her, please get married to me. I'm having issues with my green card because being in the NFL, his status as a citizen is very variable. He doesn't want to deal with that, so he says we should get married. To enter into a marriage of convenience, she gets some money and to start this graphic design business she's always wanted to. He gets the citizenship that he desires. And if you know anything about Mariana Zapata, this is a slow burn. It goes from dislike to friends to lovers, and I just want to re-experience that full arc so badly because there's a lot of animosity early on. She flips him off. He says some things that seem really rude, and you watch this slowly morph into him kind of getting called out. He does have to beg for her to engage in this marriage of convenience with him. Slowly, he is seeing the things that she is dealing with in her life, becomes very protective of her. She becomes protective of him. him, and there's just this very slow, subtle progression that only Mariana Zapata seems to be able to pull off. I love a good character arc. I love a good development of relationship like that, and I just want to re-experience it. Next up, I have probably one of my favorite reads of the year, and that is Take Me With You by Nina G. Jones. So this is not on KU, but it's an indie published book. It's just published wide, and it is Captor Captive, kind of got a suspense element to it. This is definitely one that I would hesitate to even call this a romance. I think maybe if we get really, really technical, like, yes, it is, but truly, if you have any triggers whatsoever, this is not a book for you. This is very, very, very dark. So this centers around Vesper, and we're sort of, I think we're in the 70s or 80s, and she's kind of doing all the things that she's supposed to. She's with the right guy, she's doing the right sort of work, and she steps up and takes care of her brother because that's the right thing to do when her parents constantly go on these vacations. The thing is, she's exhausted. She's not happy, and she fantasizes about being kidnapped and just being taken away from all of this. She starts feeling eyes on her. Someone's watching her, and she thinks, you know, this is in my head. This is my guilt for fantasizing over being kidnapped and being taken away from all of this. But it turns out she is, in fact, being stalked by someone, and that is Sam. And he is sort of a Golden State Killer, the Night Stalker type of guy. He is a serial assaulter. Sam has taken a particular liking to her, and one day when he plans his grand attack, eventually something ends up going wrong, and she says, please take me with you. Let's just get out of here. So what goes from one horrific night turns into a captor captive scenario. I cannot reiterate enough, please, 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 if you have triggers, do not read this book. There are so many in here you won't think of. So just like, please know how dark this is if you plan to pick it up. That said, part of what I think is really beautiful about this book is, although we're talking about truly horrific, awful trauma, we're talking about terrible things happening to someone, so much of what Nina G. Jones is really capturing is a very human experience. Healing from trauma, who am I on the other side of this? Do I appease someone, or do I fight for what I really want? Feeling hopeless. There's just so much that she explores in this book, because you are spending a ton of time in Vesper's head of her processing everything that's happening. Nina G. Jones really does this with some very exceptional, very beautiful writing, which I think is part of the reason that although it's so dark, I still think of this as a really beautiful book. It's very unique. It's very hard to describe it effectively. One other thing that makes me want to reread this book in particular, besides the fact that I really want to go through and highlight and annotate all of the beautiful things that she says, there's a set of breadcrumbs that the characters I don't even think are aware of that are set up throughout the book. And I want to go back and see if I can find all of them, because it adds a whole other dimension. Is this fate? That is Take Me With You. Now for a book that I actually don't own, which is The Devil by Ashley Jade. This is on KU. It's a first in a duet, and I think this is set up as more of a prequel. I'm not going to give tropes. I'm actually not going to say a ton about this book, because it is definitely one of those that is better experienced going in knowing less. But what I will say is it starts out as a certain kind of book, and I was sort of like, meh about it. I thought it was okay. And then it took a hard turn, and that part was very juicy and very fun. Does this still hold up? Do I like this book as much if I go in knowing the whole plot line of what actually all happens and how things play out? Like, I'll kind of leave it there, but like, this is one of those that I really want a special edition of this book to come out so badly, because I hate this cover with a passion and I refuse to purchase it. But I love this book. If it had a different cover, I would buy a physical copy. Next up, we have A Sea of Ruin by Pam Godwin. This is a standalone, but there is a free novella that you can read if you want to just kind of get a little bit of flavor. I think it's called Kings of Libertines, something along those lines. I don't know how to pronounce that word. And this is historical, it's pirates, it's dark, it's captor captive, and enemies to lovers. So this follows Bennett, who is a pirate queen. She's a pirate baddie. She is the captain of her own ship and her own crew, and she fears no one and nothing except Priest Farrell. And she is desperately trying to escape this man. Unfortunately, just when he is about to close in on her, so does a pirate hunter by the name of Ashley, and he ends up taking her captive, and now she needs to escape this dude. Part of the reason that I want to reread this book, one, it has great atmosphere, and I feel like very atmospheric books are very fun rereads because they suck you in so fully into the story. Other reason I really want to reread this book is because you follow Bennett for so much of her life, and really this book has so many different phases to it. You get snippets from her childhood and some traumatic experiences that inform who she is as an adult. But there's also in her adult life, there's different phases with being captive, with other experiences that happen further on. So there's just a lot that happens in, I think this is only like 400 odd pages. Yeah, 450 pages roughly. So much happens, and there's something about experiencing a full character arc like that that I think is really magical as well. So I think that this is one of those that is just going to be such a good reread. And I have a feeling that I have forgotten a lot of elements of this book just because there are so many pieces to it. Next up, we have Still Beating by Jennifer Hartman. So this is on KU. It's a dark romance. It has an enemies to lovers and mental health spin on things. There is a captive situation in this book, but it is not captor captive. Plot of this is that Cora attends her sister's birthday party, and she's the last lady standing. Everyone else goes home, but unfortunately, Cora's wallet ends up getting stolen, and she is unable to get herself home. So she tries to call numerous different people in her life, and no one's picking up except for Dean, her sister's fiance, who has always had a very tense dynamic with her. There's a lot of almost a bullying dynamic. They really just do not get along. Dean reluctantly agrees to come pick her up. On their way home, they end up being abducted by a serial offender who has his own plans, and this derails both their lives but also completely alters their relationship. There's a couple different reasons that I want to reread this book. This was one of the first books that I remember reading that was extremely dark and really went there with content. And I remember being so impressed with Jennifer Hartman's ability to include what needed to be included, but hold back on the things that would be more upsetting. Not to say that this isn't triggering content, like please don't think that. This is still very dark, but also the amount of focus that she really had on healing and what that's like and how isolating it is to experience trauma and what trauma bonding kind of looks like. And I really just loved that she was not afraid to make Cora unlikable in order to give her some authenticity in her journey. Messy, it's beautiful. I want to re-experience that. And also, she just released, it's not a spin-off or even part of a series, but there is a side character in this that gets her own book. And so I want to go back and kind of relive who she is through the eyes of this novel before jumping into her book. So this is one that I'll probably reread in the very near future. All right, so those were all the books that were so good, I absolutely need to re-experience them. Now I have some books that, in hindsight, I'm looking back and going, I think I would have a different experience if I reread it now. First up, we have Punk 57 by Penelope Douglas. This is on KU, but I think it's going to be traditionally published soon. The tropes in here, it's a high school bully romance. There's a little bit of like secret hidden identity going on. The plot of this is that Misha and Ryan, because of their somewhat gender neutral sounding names, are paired up as pen pals for an inter-school project. They've just automatically clicked, and they actually continue on writing well after the project has concluded with their schools. But the rules that they have is don't look up anything about this person online, don't try and seek them out in real life, even though they only live like a couple towns away. This is strictly a pen pal relationship. But this suddenly stops. For some reason, Misha is no longer writing Ryan back, and actually Misha ends up running into Ryan in the real world. He ends up accidentally discovering who she really is, and he doesn't like what he's finding. The girl he thought he knew through the letters is not the girl that he finds in real life. And so this starts off this dynamic of bullying, secret identity. Part of the reason that I want to reread this book is because I read this years and years and years ago. There was parts of it that I just absolutely loved that stuck with me. There's like a scene in their truck that I still think about. But there was so many corny elements that I had just such a hard time getting past them, and I didn't really enjoy my overall reading experience. I would be able to look past a lot of those corny elements now, and this is one of those books that I think too, it might have just been like right book, wrong time when I picked it up, because this is one that I think high school me would love this book. This was the book she needed and never had access to. I just want to find out, like, am I looking back with sort of rose tinted glasses? I don't know. So I want to know what I would think about it now. So this is one that I actually thought about rereading once I can get a hold of the audiobook from my library. In a similar vein, a book that I had sort of a mediocre time with that I think might be different now is All Roads Lead Here by Mariana Zapata. The tropes, this one leans a little bit more into the chick lit, it's slow burn, and it's a dislike to love in a small town. Aurora here, she ends up moving back to the small town that she spent part of her childhood in because she lost her mother at a very young age and she just went through a really rough divorce, so she just really needs to reconnect with her roots. And the way she's going to do that, she's going to go back to the small town where her mom disappeared. Part of her plan is she's going to go on all these different hikes that her mother went on and just kind of have a spiritual experience. The only problem is the place that she has rented out. Her landlord is an unwilling participant in this rental ship. So he doesn't want to be renting this place out to her. But she's desperate. There's nothing available. She agrees to pay triple the rate basically. And he's like, fine, I'll give up a little bit of my privacy in order to get some extra cash. When I read this book initially, I was fully in my allspice all the time era. And so when I read this and it was slow burn, small town, and leaning a little bit into chick lit and some more emotional stuff, I was like, well, that's not what I asked for. Where's the flavor? I thought it was very boring. So that's kind of why I didn't really like it. Now, looking back, and maybe even based on how I've described some of the other books that I want to reread and really like, you can see where I would probably have a very different experience now, especially now that I'm more in an era where I want more justification about like why my characters like each other, and I just don't require the spice level that I once did. It's a lot more about the relationship and the connection. Not to say that I don't love a good spicy time, but I think I would have a different experience with this book now that I'm not in my allspice all the time. Also, like, this cover is so good. Mariana Zapata has some of the best covers ever. Last up, we have Sky in the Deep by Adriana Young. This is on KU. It's sort of a Viking barbarian historical fantasy and it's enemies to lovers. And this is YA. So Aelin is raised to be a warrior, much like the rest of her Asuka clan. And they constantly clash with the Riki, who are a rival clan that live nearby. One day when she is on the battlefield, she ends up spotting her deceased brother fighting for the enemy. Is this real life? Is this an apparition? What's going on here? So she goes to investigate and ends up being kidnapped by the Riki clan. She is then forced to work in a Riki household. This ends up making her question her loyalties, especially as she starts falling for the man of the house that she is assigned to, Fisk. Her and Fisk end up trying to unite the clans against a more common enemy that is trying to pick them off one by one. This is one of those YA books that has survived on my shelves. If you've watched any of my previous videos, you know I used to read a ton of YA. I do not really read YA anymore. The thing with this book was this was a book and a premise that I have written short stories like way back in the day that were strikingly similar to this. So when I read this book, I was like, this is the book that I always wanted to write. It already exists. I was in love with the fact that the novel in my head existed out in the world somewhere, that I was like, this is spectacular. This is amazing. Since I don't really read YA anymore, I'm curious whether that experience would still hold up, whether I would still feel that way now, because now I'm into like a lot spicier things that I might not like it as much, but maybe I'm totally wrong, because if we're gonna go fantasy, I want sexy barbarian fantasy. That's what I'm going for. Those are all the books that came to mind when I thought about rereading books, memorable books, books that I primarily own in a physical format because I love them or appreciate them in some way so much. So with that, let me know, what are the books that you either like to reread or need to reread or want to reread? Any sort of rereading element put that in the comments. Let's chat about it. I want to know what books are on your list. Don't forget to like this video if you like it, subscribe if you want more content from me, and I really hope I see you on my next video. Bye-bye.